Hello everyone and welcome back to Insomniac Woodcraft. My name is Ethan and I have an exciting project going on in this video. A few weeks ago I bought a walnut burl cookie from an Instagram account called Worldwide Burl. They host Instagram auctions for slabs of wood. I picked out a portion I wanted to use for an epoxy project. I'll start by running the belt sander over it, getting all the really rough marks worked out of it, and just look at that wood grain. Did that on both sides and then hit it real quick with the orbital sander. I'm using some melamine to build a rectangular mold for my epoxy pour. My dad was in town visiting this week. You'll see an extra set of hands helping me out here. I built the mold to be slightly oversized. That is something I learned from watching other YouTubers who have a lot of experience with epoxy. Build it a little oversized and then trim it down when it's all done. With the form built, I'll run a bead of caulk around all the seams. And because this is the first time I've ever used epoxy, I'm doing everything I can to make sure I don't get any leaks. We then lined the entire mold with just some clear packing tape. I've seen people using Tyvek tape and stuff like that, but the packing tape will basically do the same thing. I'm going to start by mixing just a little bit of epoxy and brush that onto the live edge of my piece of lumber. Unfortunately, my camera died right in the middle of this, but I mixed up about a quart of epoxy, and I wanted to make sure the live edge of this slab showed up good. I decided to mix some white and silver into this first layer. The epoxy I'm using is supposed to be good up to 1 inch at a time. This first layer ended up being a little less than an inch, but that's okay. I want the majority of this pour to be clear. The temperatures were pretty cool this day. That first pour ended up taking about 36 hours before it was ready to be poured on top of. I'm mixing up another quart of clear epoxy, let it sit for a few minutes to work some bubbles out before I pour it, and did my best to pour it nice and easy over that white layer. I ended up mixing a little bit more to try to get closer to that 1 inch depth for this pour. I came back after about 30 minutes, hit it with the heat gun to pop any bubbles that had risen to the surface. At this point, I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. This is exactly how I visioned it, the base layer of white and then clear on top. I still have one more pour to go. I decided to run another bead of caulk across the top of the slab before I do this last pour. In case I over pour it, that should hold my epoxy toward the front of the slab. This will be the final pour. It gets me right up to the top of that live edge. Once again, let it sit for a while and then come back with the heat gun. I ended up letting this sit for about 3 or 4 days before I cracked it out of the mold. As you can see, the mold comes off pretty easily. A lot of that packing tape just peeled off the melamine. And all that prep at the beginning was definitely worth it. I didn't have any leaks, so next time I do this, I'll probably use the same process. Here's an up-close look, and I really couldn't be happier. This is crystal clear, bubble-free. I'm gonna call that beginner's luck. And now it's time to get to work on this thing. If you didn't see my last video, that was an in-depth look at this router sled table that I built, and this is the first project I'm using it on, and it ended up working great. I have these dovetail clamps. These are the MICROJIG dovetail clamping system. If you're interested in trying these out, I will have an Amazon affiliate link down below where you can purchase these. It won't cost you any different than if you just search for it on Amazon, but it gives me a tiny margin of that purchase, so that's one way to help out the channel. As you can see, that slab is held rock solid. I'm using an 1.25 inch flattening bit on my router, and when I got to the epoxy end, I started with the bottom of the slab so that I had a little bit more control over how much of that white layer of epoxy I left on. I ended up doing that epoxy portion in 2 passes because it was a little bit thicker, and then I flipped it over and did the exact same thing on the top side. The lines left across the slab from the flattening bit sand out very quickly. I think I was using 80 grit, and in just a few minutes the top side was looking nice and flat. The epoxy got around the edge of the slab, which left a pretty uneven edge. I just ran it across the joiner a few times to knock all of that down. I cleaned up all the other edges with the table saw and went back to sanding. I did fill in some holes and cracks with epoxy. I didn't record that. I'm still getting used to turning on the camera when I'm doing work like this. After all of that hardened, I'm back to sanding. I drew these lines on the slab to make sure I was getting a nice even sanding across the entire surface. I took this up to 220 grit, sprayed some water on it, and used some paper towels to wipe up some of that epoxy dust. And that also gives you a really nice look at this wood grain. That epoxy will clear up when I put finish on it. And in my next video, I'll be turning this into an end table. So make sure you're subscribed so you see that when it comes out. And thanks for watching.